Story 1. Kelpie. I wasn't very old when I first saw it. Maybe about 5 or 6 or so. It was a long time ago, but I remember it well. For what feels like the longest time, the whole experience of it felt like a dream, like it never really happened, just a little image in my head, a half-forgotten memory. Maybe it didn't. I can't remember exactly where the place was, just what it looked like. As the same with the people there. No face or name I could say now. Maybe they weren't even there. Just additions by time to the memory, slowly changing the devils in the details. But they don't matter much, they never did. What did matter was the Kelpie. It was summer. I was playing near the bayou not far from my grandmother's house. I had been sent there to spend the duration of the warm season. My mother thought it was good to breathe fresh, humid air instead of the city smog. My summer that year was spent with my grandmother down south. She was a fierce old lady, second generation from Scotland. Often she would tell wonderful tales of the lochs and forests from her parents' homeland. Beautiful seal women who could change shape at will as they sunned on the rocks or swam in the sea. Another was the each-witch, a more ferocious beast, but also quite interesting to me. My grandmother said that they could take the form of a singing woman, where they would lure sailors into the ocean and drown them in the salt water when they got close, like sirens. The one I loved most, though, was the unicorn, such a majestic, mysterious creature. I liked how pure it was told to be. I had always had a desire to see one, to touch its pure, white coat, but I knew they weren't real, just stories, just tales. But I liked to pretend. One day I went down to the bayou to catch a fish. I was very proud of myself, having made a pole from a stick and some string. My grandmother laughed and said if I caught a fish, she would cook it for me. I became very determined to the task. I told her I would be back before sundown. I waited at the banks of the water, legs crossed and pole in hand. There was a small bit of uncooked bacon on the end of the line. I knew I was going to catch a fish. I just knew it. My train of thought and concentration was broken by music. Someone was playing a fiddle. The sound was enchanting. I looked around for the source, not finding one. I tried to follow the sound, abandoning the pole on the bank with the line still in the water. I quietly crept along the bank, walking until I found the source of the music. I found who was playing the fiddle. It was a young man, sitting on a branch of a large tree. The limb hung just above the water, and the young man lay against it, suspended over the mirror-like surface, playing a tune to his wooden fiddle. The white strings seemed to glow in the faint morning light. He stopped when he saw me and smiled. No words came between us, but he beckoned for me with his hand to take a seat on the mossy bank, and he continued to play. The music was wonderful. When the song ended, I asked for him to play another. He nodded, but only if I went into the water. My grandmother had been very keen with me to keep out of the water. I could not swim at the time, and she made me promise to stay on the bank. So I removed my shoes and let my legs dangle in the cool, calm water. He played another song. When he finished, he beckoned with hand again for me to come closer, deeper into the water, like he was going to tell me a secret, and whispered in my ear. I shook my head. I had made a promise. The young fiddler seemed sad, disappointed. I can't quite remember the details of his face, but I can just remember his frown. He sighed and rolled off the branch and into the dark water without a splash, Just a few small ripples came from where he entered the bayou. He never came out of the water. After that, I went back to the house as my grandmother called my name. First, I ran to get my pole. A tiny minnow was at the end of the paper clip hook. I almost told my grandmother about the young fiddler, but I didn't. She would just think it strange and say it was nonsense. The next day, I went again back to the bayou banks, fishing pole in hand. I said to my grandmother I would catch a bigger fish. I told her I would be back before sundown. I went back to my spot and sat cross-legged, pole in hand. There was a small cut of deer on the hook. I sat and waited for a fish to bite, my thoughts trailing off about my grandmother's stories. They were stopped by the sound of laughter. It was a girlish laughter, light and soft. I was curious. Usually the bayou was so lonely, just the call of faraway birds and the hum of cicadas. But the laughter broke, though it, right into my head. I followed the sound, leaving my pole on the bank and the line in the water. Moving silently, I walked along the bank. In the same place, with the low-hanging tree limb, was where I found the source of the laughter. That small, watery grove seemed just a little different. A large gray rock sat in the middle of the water, emerging from the deep. I hadn't noticed it before. Possibly I just hadn't remembered it from when I met the young fiddler. Sitting on the rocks were 3 young girls. They looked a few years older than me. All of them had long, dark hair that swayed around them like thousands of waved silk strings. Hearing them laugh made me happy. I don't really know why. I got closer and sat on the bank to watch them. The girls were as beautiful as the sulkies in the tales my grandmother told me. They all had fair skin, seemed to glow in the dimmed bayou light. One of them met her dark eyes with mine. She beckoned with a finger towards me. She wanted me to come and play. I wanted to. They seemed as though they were having so much fun up on the rock there. I took off my shoes and rolled up my pant legs. I waded in up to my knees, and my feet sunk slightly in the silty mud. But looking down into the water, I remembered I couldn't swim. I sadly stood there, sorrowful that I could not join these new friends. One by one they slid effortlessly into the water and swam towards me, only their eyes visible above the water with their hair flowing behind them. They swam around my legs, barely disturbing the water. One pulled gently at my leg, another at my hand. I shook my head. I couldn't. Disappointed, they sighed dismally and let go of my hand and left, slipping away like the water they swam in. Their sighs were almost musical, as melodic as they were. I didn't want them to go. I almost swam in after them, but I heard my grandmother call my name. I went to get my pole. A small fry was at the end of my line. I almost told my grandmother about the Bayou Sulky girls, but I didn't. I felt like they were mine somehow, like a secret that only I would know. The following day, I set out again. I was going to get a bigger fish. I had 2. This was my last day in the bayou. I was going home the next day. I told my grandmother I would be back before sundown and went to the bank to fish with the pole in my hands and my legs crossed over one another. There was a small strip of gator meat at the end of my makeshift hook. I gazed out into the dark, still water. It seemed almost dead, lovely, but dead. A metallic blue dragonfly landed on the water, took a sip, and flew off. I watched it go. My attention was then turned to most unusual noise, oohs, and a neigh. There were no horses in the bayou, so I started to wonder. I put my pole down on the bank and let the line sit in the water. I followed the sounds of the braying horse. Yet again I came to that same place. The willows hung low, the tree limbs sat just above the water, and the rock was empty of any sulky girls. Standing by the tree on a small island bank in the middle of the water was a unicorn. It didn't have a horn, much to my disappointment, but there it was, a pure white horse. It pawed at the ground with long furred hooves. Its mane was elegant and shiny. It seemed to glow, just like the sulky girl's skin and the young man's fiddle strings. It was beautiful, even if it may not have been a unicorn, as the bayou girls were not sulkies, and the young fiddler not the singing each whist. It looked towards me and waved its head up and down, up and down. It was calling me to it. Without hesitation, I got into the water. I didn't even take off my shoes. I stood knee-deep. The white horse trotted into the water and began to swim to me. I hoped it would play with me on the banks, or at least in the shallows. It stopped, though, just a little further out from where I was. It could stand there, but then again it was much bigger than me. The water couldn't be too deep over there, could it? It looked towards its back. It was offering me a ride. In my excitement, I forgot all about my grandmother's words and went deeper into the water, up to my chest. Then my shoulders. The water felt suffocating as it went higher and higher. I felt like my lungs were being crushed under the pressure of it. I held my hand out to the white horse. It was still just out of reach. I took another step, and the water was to my chin. My fingers brushed over its silky mane. Water weeds had collected in it, giving it green flecks here and there. I went to touch it again. This time, though, it felt more sticky, like tape or glue. Looking down into the water, the white horse had lost its glow. It seemed more gray, darkening the further down it went until it was almost black. Maybe it was just the water. My foot slipped. I went down under the water, opening my eyes in panic. I was horrified at what I saw in front of me. Where the white horse's belly and legs would have been, I only saw smooth, black, decaying flesh, water weeds strewn in and out of it. The back legs fused together in a slowly fanning tail. It was like something out of a nightmare. I immediately stepped back, my movements slowed by the water. I turned around and my head broke the surface as I reached the shallows. I scrambled onto the bank and looked back. The white horse was gone. I felt a relief. Although I deeply missed the white horse, where had it gone? I heard my grandmother call my name. In my soaked and muddy clothes, I ran by my fishing pole. A large catfish was at the end of the hook. I left both and hurried back to my grandmother's house. I told my grandmother about the white horse. I did this time. I left out the sulky girls and the young fiddler from my story, and I did not mention the nature of me falling into the water. But I asked her about a white horse in the water. She told me a tale about a kelpie. It was water demon that often took the shape of a beautiful white horse, among others, such as a handsome man playing a violin or a young maiden. It would offer a ride to anyone willing, then take them into the water and drown them. Nothing would ever be found of them. That night I forced myself to go back there. I needed to see if it was real. By the light of my torch, I followed the path I had taken as I had searched for the source of sound. But after hours of searching, I could not find it. No green willows, no low-hanging tree limb, no rock. I went back home the next day, happy to be away, yet desperate to go back. I never did, until recently. My grandmother had died about a month before. It had been years since I had seen her. In fact, she had visited only once since the time I spent a summer with her. I traveled down back to the bayou, back to her home to pack up her things and sell the house. I had nearly forgotten those 3 days down at the banks of the bayou. The whole summer had been a blur that year, but going there brought those memories back. For so long I had dismissed it as a dream or some dull event of meeting other people, a man playing an instrument, some girls swimming in the water, an animal on another bank, a deer perhaps, or a white goat that had lost its way. Nothing out of the ordinary for the South. Maybe it was just my imagination that I saw a white horse and pet its mane. But to reassure myself of this childhood nonsense, I decided to go and take just one little look that morning. I would be back before sundown. I found my old fishing spot. My pole was still there somehow, as if I had just left it. I found the fresh carcass of the catfish I had left there years before. I tossed it into the water, curious. Then I heard the music, fiddle music, and laughter, and the sound of a horse. I followed it, and I found that same place, the place with the willows and low-hanging tree limb, and the rock, and the opposite bank with the tree. Once I got there, though, all the music and laughter was gone. The tree limb sat empty over the water, the rock isolated and alone. On the opposite bank was the white horse. The Kelpie, it shook its head and beckoned me over. Something seen, strange, not quite right, out of place, but against my better judgment. I took off my shoes and stepped into the water. Faintly I could hear hissing and a quiet screeching noise. It sounded like it was coming from the water. I ignored the sounds and went deeper into the bayou. Finally, it was getting too deep to stand. As I kicked off the bottom, my foot hit something sharp. I don't think it bled, though, so I continued across the water without a thought. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was under me, swimming, maybe even multiple somethings. I climbed onto the bank. As I got close, the Kelpie kneeled. It was offering me a ride. I remembered what my grandmother had said about these offered rides. I took a box knife from my back pocket and held it behind my back just in case. Opening the blade, I stepped closer and hesitantly put a hand on the magnificent beast. Its white fur was soft and felt like water in my hands. I told myself I shouldn't. I had one of those feelings that you get going into a dark tunnel or alley. You know it could be dangerous, and most likely is, but you still go. I sheathed the knife and sat atop the white horse. It stood and pranced in a circle. I laughed. Oh, how I wished I had done this years ago. Looking up, I saw the young fiddler laying on the low-hanging tree limb. He plucked a string and began to play. He had a handsome face, with shaggy blonde hair hidden under a hat. His clothes looked old, like he was from the Wild West. The 3 bayou sulky girls came out of the water and lay atop the rock, laughing and brushing out the water weeds with their fingers. I noticed their faces this time, soft, delicate features with shining dark eyes and smiling mouths. They all seemed so happy. I started to feel the same. A large grin was stuck on my face, though after a moment that was replaced with a feeling of sickness, worriment. I had a deep ache in my stomach. I was scared, but of what? I tried to lift my hand from the white horse's neck. I wanted to get off. I wanted to swim to the other bank and run away from this place. My hand wouldn't move. I pulled at it with my free hand, but it was stuck. Like it had been glued, I watched in horror as the white horse's coat began to gray before my eyes, becoming darker and darker. Finally, it became an oily black. Light shined off of it in different colors. It turned its head towards me. No longer was this the beautiful creature I had seen across the bank. It was a monster, the kelpie. Its eyes were blue and clouded, and I could see its jagged teeth through a decayed mouth. A long, greenish-black tongue lapped out of its jaws. The kelpie's skin started to become a sticky black goo, engulfing my hand and surrounding my legs. I called for help from the young fiddler and the sulky girls. It was like they did notice me shouting at them. When they did finally look at me, I realized that they too were not as they seemed. No longer were the sulky girls beautiful and young. Their skins were green and rotting. One of them was missing an eye. They gazed lazily at me with tilted heads, as if they were frowning at me with disappointment from their retracted lips and bare teeth at my fateful decision to ride the kelpie. The young fiddler, his clothes torn and half of his face peeled away, plucked a few sad notes before his skin began to bubble and turn black. The sulky girls did the same. Slowly, they all dissolved, bone and flesh, into the same black goo of which the sulky was made. Gradually, they dripped into the water and dissipated like ink, becoming underwater smoke. As soon as they were gone, the kelpie leapt into the water with me on its back. As it dove deeper, I tried to pull away. The melting black kelpie skin was slowly crawling up my legs and chest. I was running out of air. I snatched the box cutter from my pocket and cut at the sulky's decaying flesh. It screeched and looked at me with its dead eyes. I saw my own reflection in them. It was angry, it was in pain, and it looked ready to bite. I slashed at it again, and it bit at me just inches from my face. I had freed my legs. As I tried to cut away the black flesh around my arm and hand, the kelpie jerked and changed direction, causing the box cutter to dig into my arm. Silently screaming, I watched in horror as the last of my air escaped towards the surface. I cut at it again, and I was free. At a small glimpse, I noticed I was at the bottom. There were bones down there, human ones. In that short look, I counted at least 4 skulls. The kelpie screamed and swam off into the dark water as I pulled myself to the surface. I gasped and coughed as my face was touched by the warm and humid bayou air. I looked around. Nothing was moving, dead silent. I noticed a small ripple a few meters away. It got closer and closer, then it disappeared. Only a second passed before I felt something grab my ankle and yank me back under the water. I was being dragged back down. The kelpie seemed insistent that I never make it back to the banks. I opened my eyes to see myself face to face with the kelpie. Its black mane flowed around it. Below me, the sulky girls were grasping at my ankle. I jabbed the knife forward into the kelpie's eye. It screamed again, such an inhuman noise that made my ears feel as though they were about to bleed. I no longer felt the hands grasping at my legs. The grip around my ankle was gone. The kelpie, screaming, swam away, the box cutter still in its eye. I swam back to the water's surface, quickly paddling my way back to the bank. I hoped that the kelpie would not come after me for revenge. As I reached the silty shallows, I slowly walked forward, holding my freely bleeding arm. Blood dripped into the water from my fingertips. I crawled up onto the mossy bank and lay on my back for a moment, catching my breath. I sat up and tore away the water weeds that had wrapped around me on my way to the bottom of the bayou. My legs were covered in mud up to my knees, blackening the ends of my rolled-up jeans. I looked around. It was nearly night somehow. The sun was gone, and the first few stars had begun to shine in the darkening sky. The quiet and beautiful lagoon had changed in appearance. Just like creatures that inhabited it, the rock was mossy, crumbling, cracked. The low-hanging tree limbs sat broken and sticking up out of the water. All the willows were dead, their leaves decaying upon the ground in clumps. The rest of the trees looked sickly as well. Nothing here was healthy or alive. I backed further away from the water. My hand touched something smooth. Looking behind me, I saw the remnants of a polished fiddle. It looked broken, untouched for years. Further away, I saw the remnants of 3 colorful beach towels. They were just threads now. The skeletons of fish were around every discarded item. Looking closer in the weeds, I noticed more. Dozens of things left behind by those who rode the Kelpie. I never went back to the bayou. As I sold my grandmother's house to a happy family from upstate New York and handed them the keys, I warned them not to get too close to the waters. There might be gators. As I got in my car and started to drive away, I watched as a little boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, saying, "I'm going to the bayou, just to have a look. I'll be back before sundown." I drove away, my heart giving an empty ache for the mother of that little boy. Yes, I told myself, he'll be back before sundown. Story 2. Filth and Consequence. Oh, Loki, stop. Jamie batted the fluffy tail out of her face. It tickled her. The cat lazily glanced back at her from his spot on the counter and flicked his tail in her direction once more. Jamie rolled her eyes and got up from her perch on the kitchen stool to join her mother at the oven. The smell of the casserole, Jamie's favorite, was making her stomach grumble. "Almost done," Pam said over her shoulder before her daughter could say a word. Jamie wrapped her arms around her stomach and groaned loudly. "But I'm starving," she whined, drawing out the last syllable for several seconds. Dramatically, she stumbled over to the refrigerator and began rummaging inside for a snack. "Jamie, please. 10 minutes." Jamie ignored her mother. She had never been good at being patient, and while she may have been over-exaggerating, she was pretty hungry. She hastily placed some cheese and a piece of ham between 2 slices of bread, set the sandwich on a plate, and headed upstairs with Loki at her heels. "You're not even going to eat that," her mother called to her. Jamie closed the door of her bedroom behind her to muffle the sound of her mother's voice. Nobody could know her like her mother. She sat on her bed to eat the sandwich, but after a few nibbles, she lost interest. Her mother was even more annoying when she was right. Jamie looked for a place to set the plate. Her knit-stand was covered with dirty dishes. She carefully stacked a few bowls and pushed them until they teetered over the edge of the wood. She placed the plate in the newly cleared spot and began to pick fleas off her cat while she waited for dinner. Less than 10 minutes later, her mother called to her. Dinner was ready. Jamie pushed the cat from her lap and ran to the kitchen, leaving the uneaten sandwich on her knit-stand. Pam looked up as her daughter re-entered the kitchen and almost sighed in disappointment. Jamie had neglected to bring the plate back down. It was a habit she had developed recently. In fact, Pam noticed several new habits, and it worried her. Jamie's father moved out 8 months ago. The marriage between Pam and Eric had been wrong from the start, and the separation was one of the few things they had actually agreed on in the 12 years they were together. However, as great as the decision was for the two adults, Pam knew that a 10-year-old would have a hard time understanding and accepting it. Eric was a good father and talked to his daughters several times a week, but Jamie was struggling with the change. It had begun with a little weight gain. Jamie was young and active, so Pam wasn't overly concerned, but she made a point to watch Jamie's food intake a little more closely. It didn't take long for Pam to notice that Jamie made snacks quite frequently and would take them to her room to eat. She also noticed that Jamie began keeping her bedroom door closed. One day, while Jamie was at school, Pam ventured in and found out why. The room was a mess. Clothes were strewn all over. The bed was unmade with blankets and pillows spilling onto the floor. Dirty dishes, many with food still on them, littered every surface. As Pam walked through the mess, she noticed bits of food scattered on the floor as if they had been tossed across the room. Now, as Pam watched Jamie load her plate with casserole, she struggled to contain her irritation. "What happened to all of our dishes?" she asked, her tone harsher than intended. Jamie froze and refused to meet her mother's eyes. She plastered an innocent look on her face. "What do you mean you're lucky to not be eating all for the floor because we've apparently been robbed of plates?" Looking down at the plate in her hand, Jamie said, "Then what am I holding?" That was another new habit, the talking back. "Go to your room and get all of the dishes right now. I don't have any in my room." Jamie shouted. Pam furrowed her brows. The lying was another. "I'm not telling you again. Bring them down or I'll—" "Fine," Jamie shouted. She turned to leave the room. "And clean your room tomorrow. It's a mess." Jamie returned to the kitchen overloaded with dishes. She had to make the trips up and down the stairs to get them all. As punishment, her mother instructed her to wash all of them by hand. Jamie absolutely despised washing dishes. For an hour, she stood at the sink, struggling to remove the hardened food. When she put away the last dish, her mother reheated some of the casserole, and they sat down to eat. Jamie ignored her mother's attempt at making conversation. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. That night, while Jamie was sleeping, she felt something brush lightly across her face, soft as a feather against her cheek. Instinctively, she opened her eyes and rubbed her face. She glanced down and saw Loki curled up next to her, his tail twitching while he slept. "That damn cat." She turned to lie on her side, closed her eyes, and attempted to go back to sleep. A moment later, she felt it again. Sitting up quickly, she nudged the cat with both hands. With a meow protest, Loki jumped off the bed and retreated underneath it. A soft buzzing sound suddenly broke the silence. Jamie scanned her bedroom, but the room was too dark for her to see anything clearly. The sound grew louder, and again she felt the light touch on her face. She abruptly jumped out of bed and cowered in the corner. A shadow of a figure appeared at the foot of the bed. "Thank you," the figure said. Its voice was rough and unpleasant to her ears. Scared and confused, Jamie managed to whisper, "For what?" Without answering, the figure retreated slowly until he was swallowed up by darkness. Several minutes passed before Jamie was able to move. Trembling with fear, she walked across the room and reached for the light switch. The bright overhead light made her feel brave, and she searched the room. Underneath the bed, she found Loki sleeping peacefully, either unaware or unfazed by the visitor. After turning the light off, Jamie slipped back into bed and pulled the covers up to her chin. Her eyes were wide, and her breath was shaky. She kept her gaze on the darkest corner of the room. If she really strained her eyes, she thought she could see flashes of movement. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. By morning, the fear had worn off, and by the time Jamie got home from school, she had convinced herself the figure was part of a very vivid dream. Throwing her backpack on the floor of the kitchen, she grabbed a container of leftovers from the fridge and headed off to her room. As she reached the top of the stairs, a familiar buzzing sound filled the air. She continued down the hall and reached out to touch her door handle. No more eating in your room. Jamie jumped and turned to see her mother hovering over her shoulder. Damn it, Mom, you scared me. Jamie. Language. Jamie ignored her mother and pressed her ear to her door. The buzzing sound was faint but still audible. She glanced at her mother to see if she noticed the sound, but Pam only stood there with her arms crossed, a look of concern on her face. Jamie focused her attention back on her door and turned the knob. As soon as she entered the room, the buzzing stopped. Puzzled, she looked around. You're cleaning your room today, right? Pam asked. Sure, Mom, Jamie answered distractedly. I'm serious, Jamie. This attitude has to stop. I said okay, Jamie shouted. If you don't, I'm going to. Jamie turned and slammed the door shut in her mother's face. Like the previous night, she searched the room, opening the closet and even every drawer, but she found nothing. The buzzing sound didn't come back. Sitting down on her bed, she absent-mindedly picked at her blanket. She was seeing things, hearing things. She knew none of it was real. Her mind was playing tricks on her, but she didn't know why or how to stop it. It has to be Mom's nagging, Jamie muttered aloud. She's driving me crazy. Literally, she decided to clean her room. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Jamie rolled over for what seemed like the 20th time and groaned in frustration. She was tired, but sleep was evading her. She settled on her back and watched the ceiling fan for several minutes. The spinning was calming, and as she focused on the soft breeze cooling her face, she felt herself start to drift off. A loud thumping sound made her snap to attention. She sat up. She hadn't seen or heard anything unusual in days. As she peered into the dark, the buzzing sound started. Please, no, she whispered. Seconds later, the figure appeared at the foot of the bed. Where's the food? It asked. What? Jamie squeaked. The food. Who are you? Food. I'm sorry. I need sustenance. I don't know what that is. Food. I need food. You're just a dream, Jamie stammered. I'm as real as you, little girl. The figure stepped closer. Jamie whimpered and eyed the door. It was so close she could reach it in seconds. Her mom would know what to do. The figure could sense the girl's fear and moved back a few paces. I'm sorry for being so aggressive. I haven't eaten in days, and I am very hungry. What do you want me to do? Jamie asked. All I need is food. Can you bring me food? Jamie shook her head quickly. My mom said I'm not allowed to have food in my room anymore. There must be something you can do. There are others who need food, too. Jamie was trembling uncontrollably now. There were more. If I give you what you want, will you leave me alone? The figure didn't respond. Desperate, Jamie said, "I can sneak you food, but I'm supposed to be sleeping now. Can you wait until morning, please?" The figure was silent for so long, Jamie thought it wasn't going to respond. "Yes," it finally said, but not any longer. The figure vanished into the darkness, and Jamie's body immediately relaxed. She fell backwards against her pillow and began to cry. She was terrified, unable to even move from her bed. She called out for her mother, but her voice was too feeble to emit much sound. She stayed there, weak and unmoving, until her room was filled with light from the morning sun. From the corner of her eye, she saw movement, and she knew it was watching her. For how long, she didn't know. She had not yet seen the figure in the light. In the dark, it was nothing but an outline, black and faceless. With a deep breath, she turned her head toward it and nearly screamed. The figure came closer, as if it wanted her to see. It was tall and slender, with wings that went all the way to the floor. Its skin was like a kind of organic, corroded armor, with short, thick hairs growing from it. Its eyes were huge, and its mouth was like nothing she had ever seen before. It appeared to be a large fly. "When will the food be ready?" the fly asked. Stunned, Jamie struggled to untangle herself from the bed covers. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. The fly watched her wordlessly as she stumbled over her feet, heading backwards toward the door. She didn't want to take her eyes off of it. In one swift movement, she opened the door and nearly ran down the stairs. Her mother was standing at the kitchen counter making coffee. "Did you sleep okay?" Pam asked. Jamie briefly looked her mother's way as she pulled open the refrigerator. She piled food into her arms and left the room without answering. When she returned to her bedroom, there were 5 additional flies, all huddled in a circle in a corner of the room. "That is not enough," one fly said, staring at the packages in her arms. "I can get more. Please do. Asterisk, 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 asterisk." To hide the new arrangement from her mom, Jamie began leaving the food under her bed or in the closet. Every day, she would come home from school and raid the kitchen. If her mother ever noticed the amount of food that disappeared, she never mentioned it. At night, Jamie could hear the flies buzzing as they came out of hiding and congregated around the food. She had sneaked a peek at them only once. There were so many of them. From then on, she kept her face buried in the pillow and her eyes shut tight. It seemed like it was hours before the buzzing stopped, long enough for her to fall asleep. They rarely spoke to her. After several weeks, however, the flies began to get demanding. She never brought enough. She never brought what they needed. The flies had rapid appetites, and it left her room a mess. Crumbs and scraps of food littered the floor. Different smells permeated the carpet. Pam was constantly griping at her about the mess, but the flies loved it. "Jamie, you have to clean that room. I don't know what to do with you." "I'll clean it later," Jamie promised. "You always say that. What's going on with you?" Jamie knew her mother was concerned. She wanted to tell her mother about the flies, but it was an unbelievable situation. When Jamie was away from the house, she could hardly believe it herself. It was only when she heard them that she knew it was really happening. "It's the divorce, isn't it?" her mother asked softly. Jamie could only shake her head. "Yes, it is. You've been so different lately. You lie to me. You talk back. I know you've been taking things from my purse. I seen you push Loki around. You're living in filth. For God's sake, I'm so sorry that your father and I couldn't make it work, but I don't know what to do. How do I make this better for you?" The pleading look in her mother's eyes sent a wave of guilt through Jamie's body. "It's not you, Mom. Promise." That afternoon, she cleaned her room. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Jamie knew the flies were there before she even opened her eyes, though they weren't buzzing as usual. They were chattering loudly. When they noticed she was awake, they swarmed her, batting their wings furiously and poking their limbs in her face. "What did you do?" one fly shouted. "She wants us to die," snarled another. She buried her face in her hands and let them yell at her. She finally shouted, "No, go somewhere else. I don't want you around anymore." She kept her head down for several minutes. When she looked up, they were gone. Startled, Jamie walked to the spot where the fly had stood seconds before. She couldn't believe it had been that easy. She heard a soft knock on the door, and her mom poke her head in. "Your room looks so great, hon. Do you want some breakfast?" "Oh, sure." "Hey," Jamie said, walking closer. "What happened to your neck?" Pam gently touched the reddened area of her throat. "I think it's just a rash." Jamie moved her mother's hair away and peered intently at her skin. A smattering of large, red bumps blemished the right side of her neck. "It looks awful. It hurts a little, but it's fine. I put some cream on it." Pam moved toward the door, but quickly turned back around. "You know, I had the weirdest dream last night. It was so dark I couldn't see anything, but I could hear all of these, I don't know, buzzing sounds all around, almost on top of me." She shook her head. "Anyway, pancakes okay?" Jamie stood still for several minutes after her mother left. She had a very vivid dream, that's all, and rashes were common. No sense in making this a bigger deal than it was. "Everything is fine," Jamie whispered. "It wasn't them. It's a rash." She repeated those words to herself until she suddenly collapsed to the floor. "Please don't hurt her," she cried. "Please." Asterisk, 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 asterisk. "Jamie, you're still up. I thought I heard you walking around in your bedroom hours ago." It was almost midnight, and Jamie was curled up on the living room couch staring at the blank television screen. Underneath the blanket, her legs were trembling. Whatever her mother had heard, it wasn't her. Pam motioned for Jamie to join her. "Come on, let's go to bed. Why don't we put in a movie and watch it in here? It's too late. We can make popcorn and—" "I'm tired, honey. What about a game?" "Jamie, bed." Jamie trudged up the stairs, her mother a few steps behind. At the top, her mother kissed her cheek and said good night. Jamie watched as her mother went into her bedroom and closed the door. She wondered if the flies were in there, waiting for her mother to fall asleep so they could feast. Earlier in the day, she had resolved to tell her mother everything. She rehearsed what she was going to say and tried to predict every possible reaction her mother could have. At dinner, she had been so close, but she panicked. Her mother would never believe her. Jamie had never felt so helpless. She flipped on the light to her bedroom and took a look around. Her room was still spotless, but it looked wrong. She couldn't discern exactly what it was, but something had been touched. She paced around the room, pulling drawers in and out, pulling the blankets off of her bed. She got down on her hands and knees and peered under the bed, and she screamed. Pam rushed into the room seconds later and wrapped her arms around her still screaming child. Jamie was thrashing around on the floor, her arms and legs beating the air wildly. "What's wrong, Jamie? What is it?" Pam desperately tried to restrain her daughter. She hugged her tightly against her chest until she felt Jamie calm down. The two of them were intertwined on the floor. "What's wrong?" Pam asked again, softly this time. Jamie began whimpering and pointed to the dark space just a few feet away. Pam hesitated, but when Jamie began to cry, she reluctantly crawled to the bed and lowered her head to the floor. Jamie's sobs grew louder as Pam stretched her arm out underneath the bed. She began to pull her arm back, and they both watched in horror as a paw, leg, and then head appeared. Pam flinched. "Jesus, they did this, Mom. I know it." Jamie screamed. "Who did?" Pam asked quietly, staring at her daughter. "The flies, these big flies. I was feeding them. I'm so sorry. And it's not a rash. They bit you. They did it to scare me, all because I cleaned my room." Her mother's gaze returned to the carcass in the middle of the room. "Are you listening? They bit you, and they killed Loki. I told them to leave us alone. I tried to make them leave us alone." Jamie struggled to contain the sobs. "Mom, do you have a box?" "What, Mom?" Jamie stuttered. "You believe me, don't you? I'm going to. Get Loki out of here, and you're going to clean the rest up." Pam gagged and held her hand over her mouth. "Do you believe me?" Pam sighed. "No, Jamie, I don't believe you. You've been sneaking food up here for months. For them, you lie to me constantly. You cuss and slam doors in my face, but this—" "Mom, please." Pam threw her hands up in the air in frustration and left the room. She strode back in with a box in one hand and a bucket in the other. She placed the box on the ground, gently lifted Loki, and placed him inside. "I'm calling your father," Pam said from the doorway, the box under her arm. "We'll need to decide what to do with you. Please listen to me," Jamie pleaded. She hugged her arms around her knees and stared up at her mother from her spot on the floor. Pam looked at her daughter's tear-stained face. "No, for once you are going to listen to me. You are to stay in this room and clean up the mess. There's a rag and the bucket for you." "No, don't leave me in here." Pam slammed the door behind her, leaning against it. She shook her head, unable to believe the situation she found herself in. Pam never would have believed her daughter capable of such a horrible thing, but her behavior had been so odd lately, and now she was talking about giant flies. From the kitchen, Pam called her estranged husband and explained the situation. She had awakened him, and he wasn't happy about it. "I have a dead cat in the garage right now, Eric. I would say this is pretty serious." Listening to the agitated voice on the other end, Pam clenched her teeth. "Fine. Why don't you talk to her? Jamie," she called up the stairs. "Get down here. Your father wants to talk to you." Pam lowered the phone to her side and rubbed her eyes. She just wanted to go to bed and pretend this incident had never happened. She strained her ears but heard no movement from upstairs. "Jamie, now." Her eyes fell on the water bowl near her feet, and she gagged again. "Jamie, calm down, for God's sake," she heard Eric say. Fuming, Pam stomped up the stairs. The door to Jamie's room was ajar. She pushed the door open with such force it banged against the wall. For a minute, she didn't know what she was looking at. There was a mass on the floor, a black moving mass in the center of the room. As Pam watched, a pale white hand poked its way out and reached upwards. The mass began to rise, dropping black clumps as it ascended. Suddenly the door slammed shut, causing Pam to turn around with a gasp. The door was covered in tiny, black flies. Almost paralyzed with fear, Pam turned toward the mass. She suddenly knew what it was. 1,000 tiny flies were moving, crawling all over, and eating their way into her daughter's body. The flies pulled away, leaving the now lifeless body of Jamie falling to the floor. "Jamie, no," Pam cried softly. The flies swarmed Pam. She waved her arms erratically, trying to fight them off, but it was pointless. They attached themselves to every inch of her body, and she collapsed to the floor. As her body hit the ground, her hand was jolted open, and the telephone slid away. "Pam, what's going on? Is everything okay, Pam?" Story 3. Glow-in-the-dark cardboard skeleton. I've just awoke to see a cheap Halloween leftover glow-in-the-dark cardboard skeleton pinned to my closet door. And no, this isn't yet another creepy story where someone or something has been hiding inside to emerge in the night. I hope. All I can see in the darkness of my room is the faint, pale green glow of those old yellowing bones. But I am afraid that if I reach over to switch on my bedside lamp, I will also see my old friend David, or whatever is left of him. David was the strangest kid at my old school. In fact, he was the strangest person I ever knew. Nobody else ever really liked him. Even my mom, who is usually the nicest of people, never seemed to call him by his name, always referring to him as that boy. When I'd arrive home late for a meal, or covered in mud with my shoes scuffed and clothes torn, she would say, "Have you been hanging out with that boy again? Or haven't I always warned you to steer clear of that funny boy?" He seemed to have a stink which followed him around, and although I never once saw him throw a punch or break anyone's stuff, people who crossed him would often end up hurt or in some kind of trouble. The other kids taunted him pretty badly, mainly as he was always very scrawny, all skin and bone, but he never once got beaten up, as they were all a little afraid of him. He lived a minute's walk from me, and we became friends despite his strange ways. I guess he must have latched on to me because I was always a patient and easygoing kid, and more prepared than most to humor his many outrageous claims. He had thwarted armed robbers in the local bank and tackled deadly invaders in his home. He was the world body-popping champion and lethal in most forms of martial arts. His lies were always way over the top, and even as a young kid I found this to be fascinating. I mean, why not try to impress me by telling me things that were at least vaguely plausible? His own mom barely spoke to him, and never took him out to do anything fun. He told me that his dad had died in a brutal motorcycle crash. This was one of his favorite topics of conversation, more like an obsession. The details of the incident changed every time he described it, but always involved the very specific way his dad had lost his life. Some criminals, drug dealers, or a rival gang or something, were chasing him down the highway one night, and they forced him into a trap where they had stretched steel wire across the road to snare his bike. He had been traveling at such high speed that the friction formed when he was flung over his handlebars and scraped along the road caused him to be degloved. I remember having to ask David exactly what this meant, which I quickly regretted. It is when the body's skin is torn clean off, leaving bare bone exposed. David told me that at the funeral, there was just a skeleton lying inside the coffin, only recognizable by his dad's distinctive leather biker jacket and Ray-Ban sunglasses. Obviously, that was another lie. There is no way there could have been an open coffin. But I believed him at the time. Now there is an image which can stick in a kid's mind. In David's garage there was a pretty ancient motorcycle, maybe dating from the 1950s. Late one night, a few days before we moved away, I woke from a terrible nightmare about David and screened the house down when I saw that distinctive glow-in-the-dark skeleton smiling up at me from just a few feet away, taped to my bedroom cupboard. We lived in a bungalow, and I always used to leave my bedroom window open at night, figuring it was too small for anyone to enter. But I guess David must have managed it. He was still a very skinny kid by then, though even for him it must have been a very tight fit. My mom rushed in, but I didn't tell her why I was so frightened, figuring I might get into trouble for allowing David to sneak into our home while we slept. I stopped leaving my window open at night after that. In fact, it became my number one rule in life. I returned the skeleton the next morning, more than a little angry. But by that point I was so afraid of the guy that instead of telling him what a cruel trick he had played on me, I just pretended that I enjoyed the joke and asked him why he did it. My mom visited nearly every day, and though I was never a very popular kid, I was lucky enough to have made 3 or 4 good friends who also often came to see me, usually on weekends. They made jokes about me being in the funny farm and receiving shock treatment, which sounds mean, but I knew that they were nice guys, and we all had a pretty stupid and tasteless sense of humor. If our roles had been reversed, I would have been making the same snide wisecracks. We used to explore the ward, even though visitors weren't supposed to, and my mates would try to fool the other patients into thinking that they were not visitors, but consultant psychiatrists, which obviously never worked. There was a girl in my ward named Susan, who was a couple of years older than me, with a real anger management problem. She was everything I was not: smart, witty, tough, and rebellious. I guess she was my first real crush, and she was always nice to me even though I was a total geek. One day, about a week before I left for home, she told me that during a cigarette break outside the building, she had met a strange, skinny kid with very pale skin and all of his facial hair shaved clean off, who'd been asking odd questions about me. He wouldn't tell her his name, and she told him to get lost pretty quickly. But though she acted cool as ever when she told me about this, I could tell that he had gotten under her skin and totally freaked her out. He was asking if I was expected to make a recovery or if I had totally lost my mind forever. Susan told me that he sounded deadly serious when he asked this and seemed desperate for an answer. She threatened him with violence if he ever hassled her again, and threw her cigarette away and headed back inside. But he followed her and kept asking weird things about whether I was cutting myself, or if I was morbidly obsessed with my mortality. The last thing he shouted after her as she hurried away down the corridor back to the ward was an offer to smuggle inside a razor-sharp scalpel for me if I needed it. I played down the incident to Susan and evaded her questions, which soured things pretty badly between us. But my philosophy regarding David was that he was my problem and nobody else's. I alone had befriended him, and I guess I had humored him when I should have shown him some tough love, and then I had run away and left him all alone. I guess I carried around a little guilt about the way I had handled our friendship. I had made my own bed and had to lie in it. I couldn't live with the idea that my mistakes could taint anyone else, any innocent parties. Now, of course, I view the situation very differently. I was his victim. He was playing me like a violin, or like a skeleton playing the Spanish guitar in one of those Mexican Day of the Dead cartoons. I was dancing to his tune, but back then I couldn't see the woods for the trees. I never told my mom exactly what had happened with the skeleton on my locker and the friendly hospital visit, but she wasn't stupid and knew that David was circling me like a shark. So even though it hit her bank balance pretty hard, and we never had it easy afterwards, as soon as I was discharged from the hospital, she quit her job and we moved again, halfway across the country this time, and we made damn sure we told as few people as possible where we were headed. I literally never saw any of my old friends again. I heard Susan disappeared about a year later. There was a police search, but no trace of her was ever found. That is all I know. She had a real rebellious streak, and I told myself that she must have gotten bored with her life and run off to start a new one. Whatever gets you through the night, right? The fresh start in a new town did me the world of good, and against all odds I managed to catch up at high school, attend the local college, and eventually land myself a pretty decent office job with the city council, providing social services for local disabled people. I was based in a huge 1960s building with maybe 300 staff, one of whom was David. No one else who worked for the council ever seemed to meet him. He worked in human resources in a tiny, cramped basement office, but he was never around. His whole department never seemed to have anyone around. There had been some pretty severe budget cuts after the financial crash in 2008, and I guess that had left just a skeleton staff. I don't know how he tracked me down. He must have been very determined, as my mom had changed both of our names. I didn't realize he worked there at first. I heard references to some new guy downstairs named David, but let's face it, it's a very common name. And, like I said, nobody ever seemed to see him around the premises. But after a few weeks, I saw his full name on a round-robin internal email, and I felt like I had been gutted like a fish. The email was discussing an upcoming office Halloween party. It seemed that David had volunteered to bring in his own decorations and make the place exquisitely creepy. I walked right out of that building, went back to my little flat, and started packing my belongings. I never even told them that I'd quit. I remembered someone from the office describing a very thin and odd-looking man in an elevator a couple of days earlier, who wore so many clothes you could barely see an inch of his skin, even wearing a hat and gloves, though the weather was warm for October. A woolen scarf obscured his mouth and nose, and tinted glasses hid his eyes, but she said that she was sure his skin was the color of porcelain. I doubt it's a coincidence that he found work in human resources. There, he could quickly learn everything about me, everything he needed. I left town that same afternoon, withdrew my savings and closed my bank account, threw away my phone, bought a bus ticket to a city I've never visited before, and rented a cheap room. This room and laid low. Luckily, my mom had taught me to always have enough cash so that I could go on the run. I could always live very frugally anyway. I never ate much and avoided social situations. I had developed a terror of telling people about myself, about my whole life. I barely left this room in months. Today I read a story in the newspaper about a truly horrific motorcycle crash which took place not far from where I grew up. The man involved had been middle-aged. I recognized his surname. The details were sketchy. Just something about him being rushed to hospital after riding straight into a steel wire placed across the quiet country road which he drove down. Each day he was speeding when he hit the wire. I guess he must have been flung head first along the asphalt. In that situation, there isn't much a leather jacket and pants can do to save your skin. I stared at the small photograph of his face for a very long time. He seemed vaguely familiar from somewhere. The police are appealing for information on the incident. I could contact them, I thought, but maybe tomorrow morning. First, I needed to lie down and close my eyes. I didn't want to think about anything at all. Thinking is bad. I wanted to drain my head of everything, and I felt warm, very warm, constricted in my skin. I wanted to take off my heavy overcoat of flesh and let my bones cool off. I slept more deeply than I had in months, perhaps years, as if there was a huge weight stripped off my shoulders. Now I lie here wide awake in my bed and stare at that skeleton. Its glow has faded from age. The time is 3 a.m. Soon the dim light of a new day will aid my eyesight, forcing me to confront the presence in my room, the presence in my head, in my life. I have learnt at last that this thing has always been there. If I run, it will follow me, and I have nowhere left to hide. There is a cool breeze from my open bedroom window. I guess I have let my old rule about never leaving windows open lapse. I figured that I should have been safe, as that window is tiny, maybe 8 inches by 6. Nobody could have fit through in one piece, but my bedroom door is bolted from the inside, and there is no other way in. David must have squeezed through, or what is left of him. I bet if I reach up for my bedside lamp, I'll find a scalpel there, too.